Greetings! It's I, Pathfinder van Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome! I hope you were enjoying today. We're going to be continuing our Golarion Gazetteer, where I'm taking you on a tour of many of the different countries and regions across Golarion. Places where, well, letting you know what's there, who's there, what they're doing, what kind of places you can visit, all that kind of stuff. This is our tour of the planet Golarion. Today, we've got Kyonin, the homeland of the elven race. So we're going to be diving deep into that. And as usual, I require myself to have a number of sources, and we can talk about those sources right now. So, let me switch us over to the books I use, because I like to shout out the various books that are sources of information. But I also use the Pathfinder Wikipedia page as basically a good place to outline things and provide some basic information combined together. But I reference things like these, in case I reference the campaign settings, the Inner Sea World Guide, the Elves of Golarion, and I even did look into the information they had here on Descent into Midnight. Now, this is one of the final book in the Second Darkness adventure path and includes some information on Kyonin. So these are the 4 books I would recommend if you want to do your research on your own and dive deeper than what we're going to talk about today into Kyonin. Those are the 4 places I would recommend. And again, we're going to go over a good chunk of what's here talking about Kyonin, but, you know, sometimes you can get some extra stuff. So, Kyonin was almost completely evacuated right before the Starstone happened. The Earthfall, the corrupt destruction of the world, the apocalyptic thing that happened thousands of years ago, which destroyed the great empires that were very developed magically and technologically, of things like Aslan and Thassalon. And, yeah, it was pretty recently, by Elven standards, that they returned to Golarion to reclaim this ancient homeland of theirs. Kyonin, though, is very isolationist, and very few non-Elven visitors ever visit their capital, Yadra. I-A-D-A-R-A. Anyway, let's talk about the history of Kyonin, because the history does start, of course, before Earthfall, before the great destruction that rocked Golarion, that was very apocalyptic and changed the course of the world pretty heftily. Kyonin most likely didn't have the same kind of name as it has now. It's not always the same country, and the borders were most likely very different. But what is Kyonin now is the homeland, the spiritual homeland, this core of whatever was before Earthfall. It's unknown how many elves resided there. There wasn't, like, measurable time in a meaningful way, only by great astrological cycles, the ebb and flow of seasons. Kyonin had been inhabited for a very long time before Earthfall. Ruins of monuments, buildings, fountains, orreries, sculptures dot the forest north of the Five King Mountains. It's known that the elves lived in harmony with the land during this period, and a lot of structures they built were built into the landscape itself. So, the forests, the fields of this homeland have been dwelt upon by elves for an immeasurable amount of years. But they abandoned their home. In minus 5293 AR, approximately 10,000 years ago, as going by Golarion time period, what it is in the modern Golarion, the elves saw the Starstone fall. They knew the devastation it would wreak on Golarion. And so, seeing no alternative, they fled through a magical gate known as Sevorian Stone to the realm of Sevorian, on another planet, which they are rumored to have maybe originated from there. But again, watch my Elf episode to see about the storylines about where they really originated from, but they still had connection. So, what was left behind was legends and fantastical ruined cities. There are some elves that remained on Golarion stewards of their former homes, the ancient cities, as a loyalty for the planet, Some that believed they could survive the apocalypse, or believing that those that saw the stone coming were just wrong. They went about their various ways after Earthfall, surviving in the harsh new world, growing away from the old elven culture. There are those that assimilated in human cultures, became the first forlorn. Some that remained behind in Kyonin, watching over the ancient cities, protecting the ancient lore. They watched over this abandoned nation and these few sentinels for nearly 8,000 years. These few numbers largely kept to illusion-shrouded Lardra, and looked helplessly as other communities were looted. Their homes were taken over by squatters. Many cultural, magical artifacts taken during this time. And these elves just could not forgive this. They remember. And they'd certainly shared it with many of their current Kyonin brethren. But this was probably the beginning of the feeling of it. Their lands were forced to be abandoned. So here I'm showing off the nice location which we're going to be talking about, the Tanglebriar. Let's talk about, before we get to the Tanglebriar and the core of it, we're showing off here, let's talk about what brought elves back. Human. The catalytic event that had the elves return from Sorbian, those that were there, thousands and thousands of years later, began in the Abyss. The demon lord Treerazer basically tried a coup against his demonic master, Sith Vsug. Treachery and traitorous politics is not an unusual thing for the Abyss. But what was unusual was Treerazer was not killed for his treason. Instead, he was permanently exiled to Golarion in 2497. This is about 2,200 years before the modern age. This incredibly powerful demon lord found himself in the Faranai forest in Kyonin, sucking the life from the forest, poisoning the plants, the water, the earth. Traveled northward, discovered the shrouded area of Yaldra, capital. He probed the minds of the remaining elves, learned of the Sorbian stone, realized he could pervert the energies, break his connection with Sorbian, and open a portal to the Abyss and brought forth a demonic horde here. He could create a permanent portal to the Abyss and just bring forth it. So these few remaining elves of Kyonin tried to resist Treerazer, but they failed. Soon he had the Sorbian stone. His attempt to manipulate the stone didn't go unnoticed. In Sorbian, the elves detected his attempt to corrupt it. And so in 2632, they returned, pouring through the gateway, driving back Treerazer and his minions. They found Golarion changed. In 8,000 years, they did not expect the planet to recover as well as it did. So that's the thing is, they expected the world to be much more devastated still, even after 8,000 years. And they're like, wow, this planet has recovered much better than we thought. So they fought back for their homes. They pushed back Treerazer to the very limits of Kyonin. But they were unable to destroy him. They believed him contained, so they set about guarding southern Kyonin, where he had fled in an area known as Tanglebriar, which I'm showing off here, the core of it. With him contained, they basically then assumed that they would have an onslaught. Hordes of savage humans that had been left unbridled are fighting across Golarion. Nothing came. The attacks never came. And as they began to explore, they discovered humanity was in fact far more civilized than they had left. Humanity was, in their eyes, pretty uncivilized back in the time they left. They thought that they were used to be savages after Earthfall, but no. They had some civilization. And so the Elves of Sorbian decided to remain on Olirant, repopulate their ancestral homeland. And so, that's where they are now, continuing their battle against Treerazer, trying to establish themselves in this new, very different world for the last 2,000 years. Which sounds like a lot, but it's elves, so it's not really that much. Anyway, this is a Kyonin village. Settlement. So let's talk about what's in Kyonin. Because, that's an important part of this entire thing, is discussing who and what is there. Well, let's talk about who lives there first, and then we'll talk about what's there. Because we want to talk about the Tanglebriar, the various locations, the cities, and settlements and stuff. But of course, Kyonin is Elves. They're the largest population of Elves on the entire planet of Golarion, despite having a very low birth rate. It is the spiritual homeland of the Elven people, and there is a lot of Elves within Kyonin that are very opposed to non-Elves living there. There's some extremely conservative groups, such as the Winter Council, which we will talk about when we talk about those that rule there, that violently oppose this. There are still 3 communities within Kyonin where non-Elves are welcome. The Port City of Green Gold allows trade with foreign merchants on their soil. Has a flourishing cosmopolitan city where you can find members of every civilized race. There are the half-elves that occupy the fishing village of Ergiz. And there are gnomes that built a treetop community in the elven settlement of Amester. We'll talk about all these communities in a second, and these places. So, again, it has been 2,000 years since they returned, but they are still really in the process of reclaiming settlements and rebuilding the abandoned ways that have been since the Earthfall. Religiously, you will find a lot of assortment of deities. Calestre, Desna, Nephis are very popular, and it's one of the few places in Golarion that the Elven pantheon are common. Let's talk about what is in Kyonin? Because that's something that we do have to discuss here. A beautiful country. One of the more prominent features, of course, is the Fairnight Forest, which I mentioned. It is one of the more prominent, features on it, but also has sweeping plains, the northernmost peaks of the Five King Mountains. So the Five King Mountains is the southern border of it. Western is Lake Incartha. The north and eastern borders are formed by the Glass River, the West Sullen River, and the Sullen River, which all flows into the inner city. The Fairnight Forest is that covers a lot of the area there. It's spread through most of southern Avastin in the Age of Legend. A lot of the woodland has receded. It's an ancient forest with strong, thick canopy trees. A lot of wildlife. Fae live comfortably in a lot of niches there. There are large clearings, even though it's a thick place, glens that break up the woods. And settlement communities rarely do find themselves in there a lot of times in those clearings and glens. A lot of times, most of the elven villages that are in the Fairnight tend to be built into the forest, being part of the landscape instead of replacing it. It makes these places very difficult to locate from outsiders, and a lot of elves use illusion magic to basically conceal the town from prying eyes. Since foreigners are strictly forbidden from wandering the forest under penalty of death anyway, it's rarely an issue that they would have to use this illusion magic. And of course, the far south is where they meet the Tanglebriar, corrupted swamp. We were talking about last year. That's where the forest from harsher, crooked corruption, and where Treerazer and his minions have been kept. So again, a lot of Fae are here, and the Elves treat them with a mixture of respect and caution, and there's also treants and giant owls in the forest. Let's talk about the settlements, though, and we'll go back to a couple other geological features. Avenara is a village on the western edge of the Fairnight, between the settlements of Riverspire and Ergiz. An elf gate has been found within it that opens to a large number of other gates around the world. There's the Lantern Bearers there, which are a secret society that hunts down drow, using a site close to the gate as a meeting place. Eraugus, as I mentioned, is a fishing community on Lake Akartha. It's almost entirely half-elves. They're kind of on exile from the rest of the country. There are some humans, elves, and others that do live there. It's led over by an elven magistrate. It's constructed in the ruins of a stone tower that's far older than the settlement, probably before Earthfall. Most of the structure they crumbled down to 2 stories, and they use stone and masonry as building materials to construct new homes. Some entrances lead to underground passages connecting towers to either of the others, but with explorers being lost underground and stuff like that, the population basically keeps the tunnels undisturbed, effectively, because there's a maze of tunnels in there. Ergus Academy was established in 4695, only a couple of decades ago, and supports the influx of scholars who specialize in elven archaeology and history. Many students here hopes to attend the university's Marshall Wing, the Black Ash Training Grounds, and it was run by Headmaster Sornana Lee, half-elf. Its primarily food income is, of course, fishing in Lake Akartha. It has another industry, smuggling. Elf authorities suspect this, but they do tend to turn a blind eye to this. And I need to half-elf this. They're kind of complaining about traditional elven nobility, especially how they've been trying to treat the side, but that's a thing to talk about in the future. Save the capital for last. Green Gold, second largest city. And it is the point, as I mentioned, where half-elves connect in. On Lake Akartha, a lot of traders come here. It looks like any other human dockside settlement, except trees grow in strange places throughout the yellow roofs, and makes the city district quite unique. With the daunting history of reclaiming their areas, basically, with claiming just the major cities in Kyonin, let alone any colonies or places across the Bastia, it's not unsurprising that Green Gold, as a major city, is very important. It is an experiment of controlled integration by the Queen of Kyonin, Telendia Edrasio, Adsario, Ed Assyria. I'm going to butcher her name a lot. I'll show you more on her when we talk about the government. She wanted to authorize the establishment of this place to basically observe, understand the behavior of outsiders, other species. Plenty dislike outsiders. Basically, even coming into the Homeland in this way is terrible in a way in their minds. But even the most hardliners think that this experiment has proven profitable. Elven magical suppliers basically become available to the outside world. Plenty of people will pay plenty from it. So the town does have a degree of autonomy under a Salin Vendori, a human, who's mayor. But his actions are watched closely by the elvish nobility. So this merchant human mayor is basically in charge of the town. Effectively, it's comparable to most human settlements with some elven variations. Slavery is tolerated. Buying and selling them is not. Trees inside the town are protected by law, and as is the forest itself. Warships, especially from those from Razmirin, are refused in town, but peaceful vessels are welcome. Town is the limit for outsiders. Do not trespass beyond the town limits. Foreign diplomats can plead their case for entry, however. So if you are a diplomat from another country, you could try to get entry into Kyonin. Otherwise, don't try it. Omesta is in the northeastern Fahrenheit forest. It's got primarily its tree-dwelling gnomes, who've been living there since the elves returned to Golarion. basically, since the elves left, gnomes adopted the city. They inhabit the elegant vacant villas on the forest floors, built amongst the trees, zip lines, winch and basket contraptions, windmills set at odd angles of tree lines. Many races claimed settlements during the time of the elves' absence. The gnomes of Amesta did it without trespassing. They didn't touch elven buildings or even ground. They created a second town in the canopy above the ruins. When the elves returned, they admitted the gnomes had not trespassed. And even amused by the audacity, basically allowed them to stay. It's sort of like, they found these people living next to their old town, and, you're like, God damn it, you respected our stuff. Fine, you can stay. Another thing is, hey, repopulating is a big thing. It's a difficult thing. And keeping the gnomes there, it became another experiment in these interspecial communities. Very similar to Green Goals. So there are a few elves living in the ruins below Amesta. It's a town that is inconvenient location packed in a den of tangled complexity. It's at the heart of Kyonin in the Fahrenheit Forest, and it trades with the local elves. Engineering is a very high prized commodity, but most of the residents spend their time designing, implementing practical systems, establishing a large-scale, basically, work through mechanical means. Travel to the ground is done with winch baskets and winch-like elevators. Those that go from tree to tree do by zip line a lot of times. Rope bridges connect tree limbs for more sedate travel. Walls and roofs are made of woven ivy. And a lot of buildings appear as a shrine to rope. Windmills are outside the canopy, basically making it a spot from above, turning pulleys throughout the town. It's an interesting place. River Spire, on the Kyonin River in southwest country. It used to be a single family, but grew as most inhabitants there are basically distant related to each other. So it's a single family moved to this area, and then relatives and more distant relatives came in. So it was a single stone tower housing an elven family known as the Morgethais. They had a population explosion that resulted in the need to expand the structure. Children worked alongside great-grandparents to expand the tower and buildings. Simple ivy-covered spire to a proper town. It's basically become normal for elves marrying into the family to move into the compound themselves, often bringing members of their own clan with them. And so it's sort of like, oh, I'm marrying into this group. I'm bringing a big chunk of my family with me. And that's how basically you marry into it. You're marrying into the family with part of your family. This is a bustling community, and roughly 2/3 are related somehow through the original Morgethais family. One of the iconic characters, Daniel Morgethais family, the iconic alchemist, is a member of the family who was born here. Siavenian is on the northeast Kyonin Forest on the Endor River. It has a disused elf gate that was recently activated by a group of adventurers fleeing the Darklands. And so that's from the Memory of Darkness, their adventure path. Second Darkness. And let's talk about the capital, the illusion-shrouded Iadra. The elven capital of Kyonin, incredibly beautiful, a metropolis of elves. It's intentionally hidden and obscured by illusions and magical fog. It's an awe-inspiring combination of elven magical and architecture, and the natural environments of the Fahrenheit Forest. Buildings are artfully interwoven with twisting trees, designed to protect and augment both. Structures are mostly constructed from silver, crystal, wood, and with smooth twisting towers are populated architectural motifs, music, laughter, bird sounds, and songs you'd hear as you'd approach. It sits on the banks of the Endor River, and downside from the city, Endwar is joined by the Kyonin River and eventually flowing into the West Selen. Magic was used to enhance the beauty. As the nations become more and more isolationist, it's now used to obscure the true extent of the city with magical fog, using vines that cover the architecture. And since Treerazer arrived, he's under demonic threat. He's very attacked. He wants that gate. The monarchy of Rolling Green, Talendia Adesterial, bearer of the Viridian Crown, lives here. It also houses the Silvorian Stone that connects, of course, the Golarion to Slovenia. A lot of the elves that live there know of its existence, because certainly, after 2,200 years, most of the elves that live there aren't the original generation. They passed away, but very few actually know about its current whereabouts. It is well hidden. Non-elf visitors do show up rarely here. And when they do, they're never subject to anything worse than curious stares from the elven inhabitants, provided they keep to designated areas of business. That's Kyonin's settlements. We do have one other natural feature to talk about before we talk about Tanglebriar. And of course, that's the blasted wasteland on the southwestern edge of the Tanglebriar in the nations. The Syatrix. It's crowded with camouflage oozes, and it's avoided by elves and demons. Basically, when the elves return, they fought the demonic forces of Treerazer to claim their homeland. They lasted with sword and spell, and they finally decided their methods were insufficient to overcome their enemy. At this location here, they set fire to the swampland, hoping to purge the demonic paint with fire. They drove out the demons, but turned this area to wasteland with black tree stumps. The damage was too great for even the elves to heal, and since the 2 millennia has passed, this place has not recovered. So, it's very dangerous. There are some rumors that a Gallian noble buried some treasure during the revolution here, but no one ever found it. So cultist smugglers take risks to traverse it. So people might travel there for treasure, and cultist smugglers basically will risk it to get into Kyonin, whether or not to visit a demon or to smuggle into the country. Now let's talk about Tanglebriar. Hey. The demon-haunted swamps of the southern edge of Fahrenheit Forest and the north edge of the Five King Mountains are what the Tanglebriar was. It was once part of the Fahrenheit, but it's sinister there. The demonic essence of the demon lord and his minions has corrupted it. It's become swamps where sunlight rarely reaches the ground. Evil fake combat with demon spawn, abyss spawn demons. It's technically within Kyonin, but it's largely uncontested since Treerazer was driven there. It looks very abyssal. And when I showed the Witch Bowl, the heart of Treerazer, that was the forest that was the what I showed there. Since the closure of the World Wound in 4718, Holy warriors have left men into Kyonin to offer their demon fighting expertise to the Elves, though. So basically, when the World Wound was closed, the demon fighters there were like, some more demons around. Hey, you want our help fighting them? So, you were ever in the twisted swamps of it, it's haunted by demons, creatures corrupted by centuries of the demon lord's foul influence there. It's very hostile, patches of nettles, briars, poisonous fungi. Harzu, Glabrazu, Babas, Nalfeshi roam the Tabletop in small group. Gangs looking for victims. There's Dark Fae, fiendish vermin. Cultists who bring supplies and news to Treerazer. Carnivorous fungi. A small tribe of orcs who worship Treerazer. Who are particularly vicious and violent, even by orc standards, because of their lack of numbers. Demons of note is, other than Treerazer, one of his lieutenants, Morkavud, a Glabrazu, who, outside of his type, practices great patience and solitude when targeting his victims. Has served Treerazer for centuries, going after selected elven officers rather than decimating entire platoons. Basically, when he gets into battle with elves, he targets the officers, breaks them. Mentioning a few places of interest within that region there, we basically can talk about those, maybe. And Witchbowl, of course, the center of the tree, Treerazer's fortress and palace, which I showed up a picture of earlier. His fortress of Demontude? Ow. And there's a ruins of an elven city in there. Shevara. That's within this region that, unfortunately, was one of the great settlements of Kyonin. Can't really be retaken because it's within the territory there. So, another one of those things that the Elves would love to retake. That's Tanglebriar. That's their location. Let's talk about the government. And here is Her Majesty, Queen Telendia Yggdrasil, Edaserial, who rules from her palace in Yandra. Her court gathers there, surrounded by magical illusions. Powerful elf wizard, bear the Viridian Crown, the powerful artifact that only the elf rulers of Kyonin can wield. So, she is absolute monarch. But she is a fairly liberal queen. She understands freedom is a very high ideal amongst the elven race. And just like many human courts, elven courts are no stranger to factionism, intrigue. Many of her members of courts and advisors question her decisions, actively work to advance their own interests. Their advice can range from including urging her to retake more ancestral holdings across Everlasting Grund, dealing with Treerazer's minions, addressing Drow issue, members of the court and advisors. There are also independent elf groups like the White Council, who troops to change her mind in a number of issues. She knows for elves to recapture their power in the current age, they basically have to get rid of isolationism and re-engage with the world. And so, each passing year, non-elven ambassadors are allowed into Kyonin to explore the mysterious nation. So, in general, the elves of Kyonin have no desire to live apart from elves, and basically, despite the cultural and technological advance of humans in the last thousands of years, elves of Kyonin look at human cultures and religion as diverse, chaotic. Basically, they can't compete with these refinements of elven culture. So it's very isolationist. And rangers patrol the borders with deadly efficiency. So there are some complicated interactions with their neighbors. Edadrin's government is on good terms with Andoran, the Freedom Lovers, and the Crusaders traveling up the Southern River to reach Mendav. Others' neighbors basically are seen as the worst elements of human civilization: bureaucratic Druma, chaotic Gult, the warring river kingdoms. And Kyonin is effectively at war with Razmir to the north, because Razmir declared elves to be heretics. It's not really an active war, but the border is well defended, and Razmir is not eager to lose more troops. The rulers of River Kingdom have been known to seek recognition from the Elven nation, and basically Elf Queen has no interest in such transitory realms. It can cause friction, possibly even conflict, but the River Kingdom's inhabitants learned long ago to treat the elves with caution and respect. As incursions into Kyonin have failed miserably. Not a great idea. Kyonin has desired to reclaim the human-occupied elven ruins of 7 Arches of the River Kingdoms and establish a colony in Hymeria to that end. Elf control of this outpost has been growing tenuous in recent years with the population of Hymbia, of malcontents and undesirables they've kind of put there. So they've thrown a lot of negative members of society in this one place to use as a colony to try to retake part of the River Kingdom that is an old part of their nation, and it's not going as well as they want. They really haven't forgiven humanity for the illicit trade of elven goods taken from Kyonin during their absence. Organizations like the Pathfinder Society are reviled, and elves have responded violently to the society's interference in elven matters. It was demonstrated in 4708 when the Elven Queen had a Pathfinder group known as the Leaves of Telenadar assassinated. Surprisingly, though, they also have very cordial and friendly relationships with the dwarves of the Five King Mountains. Because they both have isolationist policies. So, like, oh, you're not going to bother us, we're not going to bother you as long as we don't need to. Hi, friends. We'll just stay here, you'll just stay there. Great! So, yeah. Kyonin gets along very well with the Five King Mountains. So, yeah, that's Kyonin, its government, and its connections with its neighbors. There is another big major thing we do have to talk about before we end today talking about Kyonin, and that's, of course, the Elf games. Because, I talked about them a little bit when I talked about Elves, I'm going to talk about them now again. They're one of the greatest aspects. They're teleportation. They're like the Storyville Stone, but they connect locations on Golarion, and allowing them to basically draw on resources in a moment's notice from very far away. The Eludra, as they're called, the Elf Gates, basically they're on Golarion, Casterful. The network was much larger. It was huge, but there are a huge number of ones that still exist. The Ancestral's Ring, where it has Lotus Gate, which is non-functioning in the exits in Yadra, Hunter's Gate in Long Space, Dream Gate in Ravani, Jewel Gate in Kolbar under Five Kings Mountains, Dust Gate in the Fingerplains of Taptesh, Avenge Gate in Herma, the Galt Gate, Ice Gate, Lich Gate, Tangle Gate. There's so many of these gates that connect together, don't connect together, and like the Alestra's Ring is the first set of gates created, other ones connect together, and effectively controlling this, which they do control a chunk of it, gives them a lot of power. Elf gates are activated using a key, which is a physical token, it might be a password, piece of music, a spell, a stellar conjunction. Some have multiple keys that link them to specific gates. Many are lost, many are abandoned. You need a tree, you need a key, you need a destination, and you go to one another. So controlling what remains of this network is very important to Kyonin. Doing so gives them a lot of power. Another thing to be respected about them. But hey, there we go. There's Kyonin. And certainly, you know, we could probably dive more into various aspects of it, and it comes down to things about elven culture, which I've talked about the Elves of Golarion before in a previous episode. If you haven't catched it, go watch that. It links to a lot about this, and certainly there are other aspects of elven culture which exist here, but Kyonin is a nation where it's doing its best to eke out an existence in a very kind of, I wouldn't say dangerous aspect of things, but it's in a position where it's making up for 8,000 years of lost time. And certainly the threat of a powerful demon on their doorstep doesn't bode well for them very much. It makes it very difficult for them to exist. They try, though. They try to build, advance, become stronger. Kyonin has spent 2,000 years basically rebuilding an ancient nation to the best of their ability. And as much as there is this hard line of, let's go back to the old ways, certainly you can see current queen realizes that's not possible. You know, there must be a modern way of Kyonin, and forming that, building that, it's a process. Kyonin is growing. Will ever not be isolationist? Probably not. Will it have more of what it is growing into? More visitors, more people visiting? Maybe. Will there be recompense for a lot of the losses in there? And certainly, again, maybe more nations can become friendly with them. Recompense for lost artifacts? Maybe. But there's so much with the Elven history, and they did abandon it. They came back. And sort of like, you abandon it because there was, think of it this way. There's a forest fire nearby, and you have to abandon your home. And because of dangers of the fire, and the damage in the area, you really can't come back to your home. And so you go away for a long period of time. And you finally feel like you learn, because maybe there's another threat to your home, or for whatever reason you learn, things are acceptable again. You come back. Someone's in your house. That's a lot of what's happening. Or someone took some of your stuff. That's what the Elves are like. It was a global threat, and they left. And there's so much feeling there that is personified on how Elves feel about leaving and coming back in Kyonin. Would you adventure in Kyonin? Honestly, probably not. I mean, there's some places that you could. Certainly some of the cities, like I talked about, the very port cities and stuff like that, that are connected to the outside world, might be a place to visit and go to. Green Gold, you know. Maybe becoming a group of adventurers that connect in with being ambassadors who find themselves in Yadra, and then some kind of plot or something with demons, or maybe, you know, volunteering with a group to help fight back against Treerazer. That could be adventures for that. Certainly, as much as Elves are isolationists, things like the Crusaders from the World Room, I get the feeling they wouldn't be resistant, offering help fighting more demons. Seasoned veterans who fought demons before and willing to assist in trying to get rid of our demon problem in our territory. There are plenty of stories to tell, and I hope you enjoyed learning about it. It's an interesting place, and has a lot of history, and has a lot of elf. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. We'll visit more locations, and certainly there are plenty more locations in the world to visit as we continue our tour. If you're joining me live on Twitch, hey, thank you. Please, always, leave a follow if you haven't, and you know, just hop in the chat. If you're joining me on YouTube, watching this after the fact, you know, yeah, very interesting stuff. Very interesting. Remember, always leave a subscription there, like the video, hey, leave a comment. Have you had any adventures that deal with Kyonin? Things like Elf Gates, or even like some adventures that might revolve around anything related to here. I'm interested, because, again, there aren't any major adventures except for, like, the end of Second Darkness. A curiosity about that, you know? Again, you know, check out the other side for each of you on either of those sides. I do have some social media. I have a Discord, link below, and also a Twitter.com, where I give basic schedules, information, what's going on. If you want to catch things live on Twitch, hey, that's every Tuesday, Thursdays in the afternoons. Thursdays are usually my Pathfinder days, where I talk about a number of Pathfinder topics. And then Saturday mornings are another time where I have things. Like, that's the basic schedule. I have live plays of Pathfinder every Wednesday evening. If you want to chat with that, welcome to the chat, we'll see. We'll do more in the future, and discussing tabletop on Saturdays. And I usually do some gaming too. So that's my schedule on Twitch. A lot of my tabletop stuff, most of it, ends up on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, hey, thanks. Usually a couple days later. But wouldn't mind if you catch it live. Also don't mind if you're just hanging out here. I think that's all this stuff for shouting out my schedule, my information and stuff. Every time I got this, I never remember all of it. It's just, my brain sucks at that. But I'm gonna get going. You know, I got always big things to do, always fun to have. And plenty of more stuff when it comes to Pathfinder talking about in the future. We'll be visiting more countries, talking about more people, and just immersing ourselves in very interesting, wild, cool. But for the next time when we talk about some of this stuff, those of you out there, also otherwise, I bid you a farewell.